Hey, welcome to the podcast where I discuss the origins of all sorts of things. I'm your host, Danny Payne, and this is On the Origin of Everything. Today I'm talking about the origin of famous band names. Like, how did Brian Warner come up with his stage name Marilyn Manson? Yes, Marilyn Manson's real name is Brian Warner. Doesn't pack the same punch. Brian Warner, from Ohio, combined two opposing American cultural icons for his stage name, Marilyn Monroe and Charles Manson. That one's pretty well known, but that's the kind of thing I'm doing today. Speaking of well known, there is no band that is better known globally than the Beatles, so let's start there. On the surface, you might assume that four guys in black suits with shell-like haircuts just picked a fitting animal or insect for a band name to match their look. After all, they also kicked off a trend of similar band names like the Birds, the Monkees, and the Turtles. But upon closer inspection, you'll realize it's misspelled. B-E-A-T, like the beat of a song. A cute little pun. But there's yet another layer of meaning you might not have noticed. You see, beat music was a term of the time referring to driving rhythms of rock and roll and rhythm and blues. In the Beatles' anthology, John Lennon is quoted saying, "I was looking for a name like the Crickets," Buddy Holly's band, "that meant two things. The bug and the game cricket. And from crickets I got to Beatles. And I changed the B-E-A because Beatles didn't mean two things on its own. When you said it, people thought of crawly things. And when you read it, it was beat music." This was my first time ever trying to impersonate John Lennon, by the way. Some have taken a closer look to try to find an even deeper meaning than a mere musical pun. However, the rest of this is interesting, but it's all speculative. Compelling, but speculative. You see, the Beatles were influenced by the work and values of the beat movement. Here's a quick and oversimplified definition of the beat movement. A social and literary movement that rejected traditional writing, American capitalism, and materialism. The major players of this movement, Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, William S. Burroughs, among others, were well acquainted with the Beatles. Ginsberg was a big Beatles fan. John Lennon and George Harrison attended Ginsberg's 39th birthday party. He and Paul McCartney were close friends. John Lennon and Jack Kerouac were pals, and William Burroughs was on the cover of the Sgt. Pepper's album. But this went beyond friendship or referencing each other in song lyrics and poems, which they did as well. The Beatles and the beat movement were part of a wave of counterculture of that time. That does seem to be pretty legitimate. But making the case that Beatles was a direct reference to the beat movement is where it gets a bit less concrete. For example, here's a leading take. Before they were called the Beatles, they were called the Silver Beatles, normal spelling. That's true. The name was allegedly a suggestion from another Liverpool band leader who recommended John Lennon's band be called Long John and the Silver Beatles. John only kept the latter part. And after John Lennon had a conversation with beat poet Roy Ellis and another one with Jack Kerouac, he changed it to the Silver Beatles with an A, then shortened it to just the Beatles. The claim is that those two conversations influenced the change, therefore proving a third layer of meaning to the name. I'm not ruling it out, it's possible, but it's not 100%. Lots of circumstantial evidence connecting the beat movement and the meaning behind the spelling of the Beatles. And let me tell you, there is endless literature on this, and I wasted several days getting lost in it all. I say wasted because I really wanted to come on here and say, the Beatles has three meanings. The bug, the musical pun, and the beat movement. But we can only be confident that two of those three are true. Womp womp. I swear though, I stumbled upon two massive topics, the freaking Beatles and the Beat Generation. I can think of only two other topics that have been written about more extensively, World War II and Jesus. One last thing on this, John Lennon repeatedly joked about the origin or meaning of the name, as he was asked incessantly about it. He would say, "It came to me in a vision. A man appeared on a flaming pie and said unto them, 'From this day on, you are Beatles with an A.'" Alright, time to move on to the next band, The Doors. The Doors were a band in the late 60s through the early 70s, so we're right back in the same time period as we were with the Beatles. This is at the tail end of what we were just discussing. The Doors, if you don't know, played psychedelic rock that contrasted other West Coast bands that were producing a sort of utopian surrealism in their music. The Doors were darker and more mysterious. I won't assume that everyone listening knows who the Doors are, but I'm almost positive you've heard one of their songs before. Let me jog your memory without having to pay crazy royalty fees. Riders on the Storm, When you're strange, no one remembers your name. Come on, baby, light my fire. Break on through to the other side. And of course, come on, now touch me, babe. Frontman Jim Morrison came up with the name, The Doors, from Aldous Huxley's book The Doors of Perception, which is taken from a line in a poem by William Blake's book The Marriage of Heaven and Hell in 1790. The line goes, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite, for man has closed himself up, till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern." This idea is similar to Huxley's mind-at-large concept that the human mind filters reality by default, and psychedelic drugs remove that filter, exposing the user to a mind at large. This is all very fitting for an acid rock band in the late 60s and early 70s in Southern California. And by the way, Aldous Huxley was a writer and philosopher who lived from 1894 to 1963. He actually died the same day JFK was assassinated. That popped out to me because that's my birthday. And fellow writer C.S. Lewis died that day too. What a terrible day. Anyway, Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception, was about his experience using the psychedelic drug mescaline. And you want to know how Jim Morrison died? Well, no autopsy was ever performed, so we don't know for sure. The official report just says heart failure. But to die at 27, after years of drinking and abusing LSD, mescaline, and amphetamines, following the same path as Amy Winehouse, Janis Joplin, and Jimi Hendrix? Come on. So yeah, that's why they're called the Doors of Perception. Pretty cool. Sticking with a theme here, let's do the Grateful Dead. The Northern California band, founded in 1965, was originally called the Warlocks. After finding out that the name was taken, band founder Jerry Garcia went looking for a new name, and according to him, he simply opened up a dictionary and found the term Grateful Dead with this definition: the soul of a dead person, or his angel, showing gratitude to someone who, as an act of charity, arranged their burial. I found another, more robust definition from a different dictionary, quote, "The motif of a cycle of folk tales which begin with the hero coming upon a group of people ill-treating or refusing to bury the corpse of a man who had died without paying his debts. He, the hero, gives his last penny either to pay the man's debts or to give him a decent burial. Within a few hours, he, the hero, meets with a traveling companion who aids him in some impossible task, gets him a fortune, or saves his life. The story ends with the companion disclosing himself as the man whose corpse the hero had befriended." The term Grateful Dead also appears in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is a collection of funerary texts dating back some 4,000 years. The text reads, "We now return our souls to the Creator as we stand on the edge of eternal darkness. Let our chant fill the void in order that others may know. In the land of the night, the ship of the sun is drawn by the Grateful Dead." Whatever that means. The term deadhead is used to describe a devoted fan of the band, but that was already a 19th century term that meant one who rides for free on the railroads, or a non-paying spectator. A deadhead back then is what we'd call today a freeloader. Another massive band that came out of 1965, Pink Floyd, also a psychedelic rock band, but from England. Pink Floyd, what a name. This time, the origin story is short and simple, especially compared to the other three we just did. Guitarist and co-founder Syd Barrett named the group after two of his favorite blues artists, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. Pink Anderson. I'm not a blues guy, so I'd never heard his name before. Pink. Who names their kid Pink? Well, his birth name was Pinkney. Pinkney Anderson from South Carolina, born in 1900, died in 1974. He's got a son they call Little Pink Anderson. And Floyd Council was a guitarist, mandolinist, and singer born sometime between 1909 and 1912 in North Carolina. So those two guys were some random English dude's favorite blues artists, and it spawned the name Pink Floyd. Guns N' Roses did a similar thing where they mashed up two different things as well. Instead of naming their band after two blues players, they named it after two bands, the LA Guns and Hollywood Rose. If you look these bands up, you'll be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Both were glam rock bands in LA that sounded a lot like Guns N' Roses, but that's because they weren't just two other bands, they were precursors to Guns N' Roses. LA Guns was started by Tracy Guns, who also ended up joining Hollywood Rose later. And Hollywood Rose's lineup had Axl Rose, Slash, and Izzy Stradlin. famous members of Guns N' Roses. So basically, LA Guns and Hollywood Rose merged into one band. Kind of. This was like trying to figure out an incestuous family tree. It was in 1983 for LA Guns and Hollywood Rose, and Guns N' Roses became a band in 1985, just to give you some dates in case you weren't around for the glam rock trend. Alright, Creedence Clearwater Revival. What a tongue twister. And what does it mean? It actually doesn't mean anything, but each word was derived from something. They were first called the Blue Velvets, then the Gollywogs, and then 2 of the band members had to go serve in the military, and when they came back, they revived the band. So there's the revival part. Clearwater was inspired by an Olympia beer commercial, and Creedence was drawn from the name of a friend, Creedence Newball. He was literally just a friend, not a famous musician or anything. But they did change the spelling from C-R-E-D to C-R-E-E-D, like a creed, to add some extra meaning to the name. The double meaning thing was pretty big back then. I also thought CCR was from the South, with songs about cotton fields, the Mississippi River, being born on the bayou, but they're from the Bay Area, another California band in the late 60s. A famous band that was from the South was Lynyrd Skynyrd from Jacksonville, Florida. Though I recently met a guy from New Orleans who told me that Southerners don't claim Florida, that Florida is its own thing. They're doing their own thing over there. But anyway, Lynyrd Skynyrd, spelled with all Y's, is another strange name, and the story behind it is kind of funny to me. It's just the name of one of their high school teachers named Leonard Skinner, who was a strict, no-nonsense kind of guy, hated rock and roll, and would send kids to the principal's office for having long hair, stuff like that. I'm pretty sure that Mr. Skinner of The Simpsons was a nod to this guy. I wouldn't be surprised. So yeah, to name your southern rock band after that guy was sort of a defiant jab at authority. This was 1964. It's like the whole country was rebelling against the status quo. These baby boomers really threw a tantrum, didn't they? How about Iron Maiden? An Iron Maiden is a torture device that probably never existed. It's the casket with all the spikes. You've seen illustrations of it, I'm sure. When they closed the casket, the spikes would pierce the person in there and they'd slowly bleed out. For a heavy metal band in the 70s, this is a great band name. The Foo Fighters. What is a Foo? Former drummer of Nirvana, Dave Grohl, had just recorded an entire album by himself, the album that would be his new band's first of many. But what would he call his band? He had been fascinated by accounts of UFO sightings, and he found the term Foo Fighter in a UFO book. It was a term used by the United States Air Force during World War II to refer to an unidentified flying object. It's what UFOs were called before they were called UFOs. But why Foo Fighter? The pilot that saw lights inexplicably moving in the sky was the first to use the term Foo Fighter to label the mysterious flying objects, and he got that term from a comic strip called Smokey Stover, a firefighter who drove a fire truck that he called the Foo-mobile. Foo was just a word the comic writer Bill Holman saw on the bottom of a jade figurine in San Francisco's Chinatown. Super random. But he used Foo a lot in his comic strip. It was sort of a motif for the cartoon. Like, instead of calling himself a firefighter, he called himself a Foo Fighter on his Foo-mobile. So that's where the pilot who was witnessing strange lights or strange aircraft got the idea, in the moment, to just call them something nonsensical like Foo Fighters. The Air Force just kept using that term, and it showed up in a UFO book Dave Grohl was reading. He could have gone with Foo Fighter, but he wanted the name to sound like there was a whole band, not just him. So Foo Fighters it is. Great band, great name, and great origin story. I could do this all day, but let's end part 1 here. I think I'll have to do a round 2 of this sometime to cover more bands that weren't from the 60s or 70s. After this short break, we'll jump right back into that time period though. Part 2 is coming up, don't go anywhere. This episode is brought to you by nothing. To help keep ads off this show, consider donating by clicking the Patreon link in the show notes, or by going to patreon.com/ontheoriginofeverything. Another way you can support this show is by giving it a 5-star rating and review, or by following it, or sharing it. Let's build a community of people that are curious and always learning. Now, back to the show. Part 2 is on Woodstock. Most of you have probably heard of Woodstock, but I don't want to assume everyone knows everything about everything, otherwise what would be the point of this podcast? So, Woodstock was a 3-day music festival in 1969 that made history. Why was it such a big deal, and why was it organized in the first place? The idea to put on this festival was the brainchild of 4 young dudes looking for an investment opportunity. By young, I mean 27 and younger, so pretty young. John, Joel, Artie, and Mike were responsible for organizing the most famous music festival probably ever, though I'm sure that wasn't their intended goal. They were just trying to make some money, not make history. So John and Joel were venture capitalists from New York. They funded this whole thing. Artie was vice president at Capitol Records, and Mikey had successfully organized the Miami Pop Festival just a year earlier that drew 40,000 attendees, making it the largest concert in history up to that point. These 4 guys formed the company Woodstock Ventures, named after the town in New York. But why there? Why Woodstock? Well, that's where Artie and Mike were scouting to build a new recording studio, a project that they eventually abandoned in favor of putting on a music festival instead. The town of Woodstock had, and still has, a rich art history, attracting artists of all kinds to frequent it as a sort of retreat. Only a couple hours drive from Manhattan, it already had a reputation of being a sort of bohemian art hub. It makes sense that if you're planning a music festival, you'd do it there, and also name it after the town that had an association with famous artists like Bob Dylan who lived there. But planning a music festival there didn't work out. The local community rejected the proposal out of fear of how many people it would attract. The 4 partners tried 2 other locations before landing on Bethel, New York, on a dairy farm owned by a Max Yasker, who agreed to rent out his land for this event. The other towns that passed on hosting the festival made that decision based on a projected attendance number of around 50,000 people. Well, good thing, because if they took objection to hosting 50,000 concert goers, they dodged a bullet the size of a bus. The actual number ended up being 500,000 people. How? Here's what happened. The first big-name band to sign on to play the festival was Creedence Clearwater Revival. That gave the event credibility, giving other famous groups confidence to join the bill too. 32 acts performed at Woodstock. Some of the notable ones were Santana, The Grateful Dead, The Who, Janis Joplin, Jefferson Airplane, and of course, Jimi Hendrix. This ended up being more than just a music festival. It was deeper than that. With the nation in the middle of the controversial Vietnam War and the ongoing civil rights movement, it was a period of protest and unrest. This festival offered people a way to escape, but also to express a message of love and peace. The official name of the festival actually wasn't Woodstock. It was billed as an Aquarian Exposition, 3 days of peace and music. Aquarian is in reference to the age of Aquarius, an astrological concept that is a whole thing. But in 1969, there was this popular idea going around that civilization was on the cusp of a new age, that the old age of Pisces was ending, and the new age of Aquarius was beginning. And it was interpreted to mean that the world was going to abandon its culture of greed and violence and enter into a new utopian chapter of peace, love, and harmony. That really didn't work out that way, did it? But that's a big reason why Woodstock was such a massive event, with the turnout being 10 times what they had originally anticipated. It was a defining moment in the counterculture movement of the 60s. And contrary to what you might assume, the 3-day festival ended up being remarkably peaceful. There were virtually 0 reports of violence. Woodstock 99, on the other hand. But was Woodstock profitable? The origin of the festival was a business venture, so how did it do? The short answer is, not great. They invested $3.1 million and only got back $1.8 million. Ouch. One ticket for the full 3 days was $18 and there were close to 500,000 attendees. That's $9 million right there. So what happened? Well, due to having to change the location of the event so many times, they booked the dairy farm very late in the game, only 1 month prior to showtime. They intended to charge for entry, but as droves of people started showing up 2 days early, the organizers hadn't had the fences up yet, they didn't have the ticket booths in place, and it became impossible to charge everyone for a ticket, so they had to pivot to a free entry concert. They only collected the sale of 100,000 or so pre-sold tickets, and then had to deal with refunds for the folks who couldn't get to the concert due to traffic jams. They also had to pay 32 bands to play, that wasn't cheap, and they had to helicopter in food and water for all those people. It was a mess. But what an amazing historical musical event. It captured the spirit of a generation, a collective expression of peace and love, and a powerful contrast to the political and civil unrest of that time. We have not seen anything like it since, and probably never will. That's all for today. I'm going to go put on some vinyl, listen to some Beatles, and maybe work on my own music later. Feeling kind of inspired after this. Until next time, so long. Research, music, and production was all done by Jezere Wilson. This podcast is listener-supported, owned and operated by Jez and myself, under the On the Origin of Everything, LLC, in the United States. All rights reserved. We can be reached via email at info@ontheoriginpod.com.